Okay, we're here with Lauren today. I was just looking before we got on this call to figure out like when you started and when you finished like the main embodied method. So it's been about a month since finishing the embodied method, and you started right when I got back from my hike in August.
Yes.
So that's just some background timeline. I always like to kind of like give that information up front. And Lauren, I'd love if you could just start by sharing a little bit about what your relationship with food was like before reaching out to do the embodied method, and also like what made you decide to reach out.
Yeah. So I would say my relationship with food was always, I would say, stressful. I had certainly had many years of the belief that I was completely in control of the size and shape of my body. And if it wasn't looking the way that I wanted it to, is because I was failing to do nutrition right. And then there were a lot of beliefs about health stuff and stuff like that. And so it was always this sort of chaotic, over restrict kind of behavior, followed by periods of time where I felt totally out of control and would be either eating in secret or binging, but not trying to hide it, or just even, I mean, behaviors where I would go on a pattern of just eating a lot of strictly play food for extended periods of time, or feeling like I really couldn't stay away from fast food or whatever. And it just felt very much I had reached a point where I was really unhappy with it. I was really tired and worn out from being so stressed out about it all the time, and just feeling like there had to be a better solution. And also, one of my goals last year was to be generally more intuitive just in my life anyway. I felt I mean, this sounds silly, but I get, astrology readings, and they're like, you must be this deeply intuitive person. You have so much water in your chart. And I'm like, I don't think I am. I don't know what you're talking about. And so I was like, well, that must be there. And I've just sort of learned how not to listen to it. And so I feel like maybe that was one of the things that called me to your program, was just even the name of it, being into about it, being intuitive, and being, one of my other words was being embodied, and just recognizing that living within myself and my own desires, and this sort of fundamental belief that I had some of the truth in me already. I didn't have to go looking for answers. So that's kind of where I think I was at. And then, yeah, what really I think was the tipping point was also the last diet that I did, which was in the name of health, but it was really extreme. And I just was like, this can't, for one, it didn't do anything it promised. I
Hmm.
wasn't suddenly like, my thyroid is healed and I have all this robust health. What do they love to say? Weight just releases from your body and blah, 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 all the things, all the magical promises. None of that came true. And I was miserable and stressed out, and making my own ketchup, which most people I don't think want to do. And just feeling I've just demonized all these foods. I feel really terrified about it now. Am I failing myself if I'm not avoiding all these things because of my thyroid? It was just too dramatic. And yeah, I just reached that point where I was like, this can't be it. This
Hmm.
cannot be it anymore. So that's where I was at.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I never heard the tidbit about making your own ketchup, but certainly like diet culture will have you doing some weird shit where you're like, how did I end up with making my own ketchup? And I think
Out of
that really
carrots, no less. Out of carrots
no.
and sweet potatoes. I'm like, this doesn't even it didn't have tomatoes in it because I was supposed to avoid nightshades. Kill me. I love tomatoes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that really captures diet culture stealing like our time, our energy, like our money in many ways, because it's like the amount of time if we're going to have to start like making everything from scratch and stuff. And the energy that sucks, and really like what you could be doing with your life if you weren't like having to do that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think of the years and years and years of time, money, and just also the emotional toll of dieting over and over again. Or even when I didn't think I was on a diet per se, but I had some level of restriction because I was, supposed to be eating a certain way, even though I didn't feel like I was restricting volume of food, types of food were restricted for such a long time. And I just think that was hard. always felt like I was missing things. Like nothing has that made me crave a burrito more than like eating paleo for some extended period of time. Like,
Mhm.
like I can't stop thinking about burritos.
Yeah,
That's pretty weird, you know, like like burritos are great, but like it's weird to have like intrusive, like pervasive thoughts about food. And that was like all every time. And it's like, well, that I mean, just kind of goes to show you like what that actually does to your emotional and mental health.
totally, totally. Yeah. And one other piece, if you're comfortable sharing, kind of like what was your relationship with exercise and body image like pre doing this work? So that's like the food piece. I feel like there's
Yeah.
three main pillars, like food, body, exercise.
Yeah. I mean, so exercise, I feel like it's really, they're all really tied to each other, right? Like I was very convinced that like there was a way to get the body that I would find acceptable. And I can't remember a time in my life when I ever did think that my body was acceptable. Even when I was a competitive athlete, I didn't look like the other athletes, and that was somehow a measure of success. But also, even if I wasn't as fast as somebody else, I was like, well, see, I'm like not doing as well at this as I should. And now looking back through like an adult lens too, I'm like, you made the team at a Division 1 college. That's pretty good. Like that's pretty good. You know, like it's I mean it was I wasn't a scholar on scholarship, but I still like I'm like, that's a pretty competitive sport. Anyway, uh so there was always this lingering belief like there was something inherently wrong with my body, or and then that I wasn't doing enough to get to the body that was going to be okay. And so, I was a competitive athlete, and then I got really into CrossFit. That obviously, as many like good things come out of it, I feel like there was a lot of that same belief like I'm not doing enough, there's always more to be done, I don't have visible like protruding ab muscles like the CrossFit. And there was, I think there became this overlap too between these professional athletes that did CrossFit as a professional sport and like what normal people were going to do at a CrossFit gym. But that's like a whole nother thing. But that's the message, right? Like this is CrossFit, these people are CrossFit, and I'm this like other thing that didn't look like that and didn't also respond to the workouts in that way. So I was fried at the point that I started. Like, I didn't want to do anything. I had reached this point where I was like, really had lost the joy in like moving after someone who got into swimming as a young person because I loved it. And I worked really hard at it because I just wanted to be there, not because I was like trying to accomplish something specific. Then all that trying to accomplish specific things, like just over the years, just killed my vibe, I would say. So my relationship with exercise was, and this is the thing that more recently I'm still kind of struggling with, there's a lot of should, like you should be doing this much, you should be working out this many times, like all this structure and these rules around it. So that's one of the things that I'm still very much working through, and had kind of a big realization about recently. And then body image, at the time was, I don't know, probably at an all-time low. Um, Partly because of just body changes with age and stuff like that, but also just because of some like actual physical things, an issue with my thyroid, some fertility struggles, some issues with my back where I have some chronic pain. It was sort of like this cascade of things that I was like, these are proof that there's something wrong with my body. And so yeah, it was this sort of pervasive, overwhelming feeling of like, I'm not doing enough with my diet, I'm not doing enough with exercise, and I feel terrible. But then also this lingering like, yeah, but remember when you were doing all the things and you were crushing it at paleo and you were going to CrossFit all the time and like you still didn't feel good about your body? Like maybe it's not your body, and also maybe like that's not the answer.
Mhm.
So yeah, it had all just kind of reached this pinnacle of like, it's too painful to keep doing it this way anymore.
Yeah, yeah, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing so honestly about where you were at. And I know many people listening will resonate. And it's this underlying piece that like I keep hearing you come back to is like, this can't be it. Like this cannot be the only way to live, relating to food and body and exercise. Like this, just because that's really intuition. It starts with like a piece of intuition of like a knowing of like, God, like there has to be a better way to handle this for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was very much also that realization of like, if this is it, that means the rest of my life is going to be like suffering to a degree. And like, I can control suffering over this. Like, life is going to have enough things for me to deal with. Like, I don't have to stay in this place of like restriction and then suffering and then feeling like that's a choice at that point. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
When I sort of looking at it and going like, I maybe I don't have to do this for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this just brings up one other piece, if you're comfortable touching on kind of the before of your internal dialogue, like pre doing this work, and kind of talking through a little bit like what that sounded like. I think this is something so many people like live with certain like voices in their head that like we're never talking about. So people like, we don't always like have the awareness around like, oh, the voice in my head and the way I speak to myself could sound differently. So I think it'd be helpful to kind of chat through that piece a little too.
Totally. I mean, I think it was like a constant state of criticism. So like every single time I would sit down to even like have a certain type of meal, it would be like, oh, oh, is that what you're eating again? Well, I wonder if maybe you'll only want to eat half of that. Or, you know what I mean? It's this like stream, this chatter of like constant judgment of like, is that what you're gonna eat? Do you think that's healthy? Are you gonna eat the whole thing? Like just all the time. And then also that like negatively affirming message of like, well, this is why you're not happy with the size that you are, and this is why you look the way that you do, and this is why, and like, so then kind of hyper vigilance around my body size, and also very objectifying, like looking at my body as the parts of itself, like, oh, my stomach or my this or my, versus just like myself as a person, like a whole person.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of constant, right? Like there was no, I felt like, even this is the one thing that I know that I did really a lot, that I was almost kind of aware of doing it, but like couldn't stop myself. And it felt very shaming when I did it. Like if I was out to eat with people, I was hyper aware of what they were eating and comparing myself to it. And to the point where I would change my behavior and like
Mhm.
order similarly, or like make sure I didn't eat more than them, no matter how hungry I felt. And I just think like, it's so sad, really. But like it's so common. Like we're so used to just the constant comparison to other people, and it was, yeah, this just stream of criticism and judgment
Yeah.
that felt like it was just running kind of on a loop in my mind.
Yeah. Criticism and judgment, I think, sums everything up with like that kind of like diet culture energy. Like it's almost like your brain is like set to a different like program. Like it's like, and it's like a dark one with dark clouds that's like really mean. And then when you do the intuitive eating work, you like literally download a new program.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, doing the work, the intuitive eating work really felt like just like almost like opening a little tiny window that I could peek through into something else. You know what I mean? And then we've talked about this before. It felt like it just that little tiny bit of additional space, like I could zoom out just a tiny bit and like notice the voice and be like, oh, hi, you're here, you're being really critical, and like kind of be like, stop.
Yeah.
Also, you don't have good data. Like you're actually totally wrong about this. Like,
Yeah.
and that little tiny bit of ability to like pause and like notice that, and that little open window of like, there's another way out here. Why don't you take a look at that? Was just enough to start like changing that, because I was not unaware of that critical voice, but like I also just didn't have anything else. It's not like the message goes away in the world just because you want to do things differently. Like we're still bombarded all the time with like diet culture, everything.
Yeah. At first you can have the awareness, but no tools. It's like, and now what? Like, okay, so there's the voice, and now what? So let's dive into the kind of like present day. So tell us a little bit about what your relationship with food to start, we'll start with food, or just take it away with any of the things, is like these days.
I just feel like it's very much more like calm. Like it's much more like gentle, I would say, where I just am like, I definitely have a sense of peace of like, I'm not like making any one right or wrong kind of decision at any given moment in time that's having some drastic effect on my body. Like I'm just like existing in this body and I have to eat and I eat when I feel hungry and it's like pretty chill. I definitely haven't had any episodes of like binge eating. I don't have absurd cravings for fast food or like anything. I keep food around the house that like I know I like, and I just like sometimes eat some of it. Like I have these chips, and I actually was just talking to my brother. I was like, I remember when I first was trying to say, like, you have unconditional permission to eat the things you want to eat. It's fine. When I first was having those chips in the house, I was like, I was kind of eating them every day, and I was like really enjoying it. And I was eating, whatever the amount of them that at the time. Now, like I have 2 bags of them in the house right now. I was like, oh, some of these sound nice with like my tuna sandwich. And I think I ate like, I don't know, 6 chips. And I was like, yep, we're good. Like, and I don't care. And they'll probably just sit in the cabinet for a while. Like it doesn't, the pressure to eat like certain things because they're off limits, it just doesn't exist anymore. And so it's this very like freeing feeling of like, I'm not really making like terrible mistakes that I should feel bad about. Also, I'm not like good when I eat something that's really, more like nutrient dense. And also just using different language, like trying to adopt the language of referring to things as more like nutrient dense foods versus play foods instead of like moralizing them like this is good and that's bad or junk or whatever. Like that has changed quite a bit. I'm working on the exercise piece. I feel like I'm still wrapping my mind around the unconditional permission piece to move in ways that are different from what I was used to, which is really like pretty intense exercise, or to just not move at all and rest. Like, but rest being the thing where I just like accept it and feel good about it versus being like, should you be doing something else? Um, and trying to take steps also to just make it like easier and more accessible for myself instead of it being like, it needs to be this regimented plan and I have to go to this space in like workout gear and like whatever. Like I'm like, I'll do exercises in my pajamas. Who cares? Like it's still
Right.
stuff,
For any amount of time, by the way, like it's like
Yeah,
anything counts. Like
do a little bit. Yeah, last night I was like watching episodes of New Girl and I was like,
I
you
love
know
you.
what? In episodes, maybe I'll just do some squats. Okay. So I would just make me stand up, do some squats, walk around for a second, and then sit back down and watch more New Girl.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah. And what about the intention piece? I think this is an interesting like piece with movement is what was your intention like pre doing
um,
this work versus now?
my intention before was very much like there was some degree of a desire for like being competitive at CrossFit, like wanting to get stronger, but a lot of it, none of it was about how it would feel in my body. It was like what I could do with my body, like it was a tool, and then also the aesthetic piece. Whereas now, like my primary concern is really just like what's going to make me feel good and continue to help me feel good in life. And also recognizing like there might be points in time where I do pick up like training with a purpose, like say, you're into hiking, like say I wanted to do a specific kind of hike or something like that. And I felt I needed more preparedness for that, but not something like training for an aesthetic purpose or necessarily just like being on this perpetual like hamster wheel of like get stronger, progressive, overload, trait what like it's just different energy. So most of it is just I want to feel good. I want my hips to feel healthy. I want my spine to feel strong and supported, stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely different energy. And I definitely still feel like one of the things I have a lot of resistance still to like having a real specific plan. And I'm like, well, I think that just not enough time has passed
Yeah.
from when that was my life. So
Totally. I mean, it's so normal. It's like if you've been scarred by having a strict plan in the past, it's very normal to need space and it could be quite some time before you feel like, oh, I want to go back to that because we need to heal from like really what is traumatic, the way that diet culture treats movement. Tell us a little bit about the you mentioned before like the internal voice, the situation kind of changing and creating more space. Tell us about how some of that internal dialogue has shifted.
I actually was just thinking about that this morning because I think, looking at something on social media and some stinking ad comes up for some absurd, I don't know, protein or something that has this special thing in it. And I was like, you know what I realized is like, I'm much more cynical now about the messages coming from diet culture than I am about myself, my own behavior, and my body. Like, I'm
Mm,
like, okay, guy. Like, I literally was like, if you found something that was so miraculous at just keeping lean muscle mass on human bodies, you wouldn't have to sell it through some stupid company where you're like the only guy that has it and you're like marketing this way. Like, this would be like reaching the medical literature, and it would be like something that doctors were like, as you age, we put you on this supplement because, like, your geriatric health would be improved by having more lean muscle on your body, and this works. Like, no, it's like you're just selling something. And I just was like, God, how nice to have like such a different perspective where I'm like, oh, this is the next thing I need to fix myself. It's more like, ew, here's some other loser that's selling something and trying to convince people of stuff.
yes, that's such a cool shift. Instead of doubting yourself, blaming yourself, it's like knowing that the problem isn't you, it's the system that's like selling us these things. And that's such a shift in really self-compassion. Like you're when you speak to yourself is more compassionate versus like judging, blaming, shaming yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like that was like the big piece, is just having that space to have that. At first, it was very much more like than like a two-person dialogue in my head where the like judgment would pop up, and then I'd be like, oh, there it is. Like, that's that judgment that I've had. And then trying to like talk back to it with like a more compassionate voice. I feel a general sense now of like, for one, that voice just isn't as loud or as often. And I just don't even innately have as emotional a response to it. I'm a little bit more just like observant of things, or just like, okay, yeah, like this is what size pants I need to buy at this particular store right now. Okay, that's just what it is, versus like being like, I don't have to even necessarily have the battle of the two dialogues anymore of like, like, I feel bad about this. Oh no, it's okay. Like, and then like walk through all the talking points of like any number of things about body size or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's become a lot more relaxed, where I just don't have as intent, like I don't have that like shame response
Mhm.
anymore, which
So
is really nice. It feels
beautiful.
very freeing.
Yeah, so much peace in that and not having this like constant inner chatter that's taking you out of like the day to day. What would you say are some of the biggest things that becoming an intuitive eater has changed in your life or brought to your life?
I think it's just made me more aware of my intuition in a lot of facets. Kind of like that thing today, right? Where it's like looking at some ad that's like marketed to make you feel a certain way, and being able to be like, that doesn't resonate with me at all, actually. And now I'm just suspicious of this person instead of being, like taking it on. And just also, I think just like life choices and behavior patterns and stuff, where I just have just a general more feeling of like ease and trust in myself, because I feel like I do have the knowledge, and my intuition will tell me whether something is the right or wrong thing for me to do at a given time, as long as I can just like relax and kind of be in the moment. Like, the message will come through, and that it'll be right. Like, I think part of it was accepting, especially like early on with hunger and like fullness and things like that, just accepting like, you're getting the message and it's right. Like, your body is not going to tell you a wrong amount of like food that it needs. If you're hungry again, it's because you need to eat again. Like, that's
Yeah.
what that means, and I don't have to have like an emotional reaction to being hungry or judge myself for it. And so that little bit of like, I can trust myself and my body, like just kind of expanded outward into like any kind of thing, really,
Yeah.
any kind of decision.
one of the coolest parts about this work, in my opinion. Like, you think that it's just, oh, I'll sign up for this thing to heal my relationship with food, but then it's like, whoa, like that self-trust and peace like really expands into or ripples more so like into other parts of life. And I always like to say, like, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, once like your intuition is out, like it's out to play, and it's gonna help you govern other aspects of life, but beyond just eating decisions.
Totally, 100%. And I think the self-compassion piece was such a big part of that too. And that I think that made such a big difference also in some of the spaces in my life that would have previously been really like triggering for me or upsetting for me, being around certain people, recognizing that like so many people just love to talk about dieting. But like being able to, I think being more intuitive is like a little bit being able to be more present in the moment and just recognize like, okay, I'm here. This is this person's reality. I can have compassion for them and I can have compassion for myself. And just like also recognizing like, I don't know how to say this exactly, but something about being present and being able to recognize like someone else's stuff belonging to them and having compassion for yourself meant that I wasn't having like this like shame-filled response to these things. I was able to just be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna be here enjoying what I can about this experience with this person and recognize that like their story and their reason to have these behaviors belongs to them. And I think that space is really big because I definitely recognize like the shame spiral that I went into over and over again in the past around like other people's behaviors and comments and things like that. So
Yeah.
probably got a little distracted with
No,
it,
that
but
makes a lot of sense. I think especially contrasting it with the piece that you shared and how your relationship with food was before, of like, oh, this person's eating this or saying this, should I do this? And now it's like this person's, maybe saying XYZ thing about their diet, and that's theirs. And I will still eat what feels right for my body at any given moment. So I hear really in that, like, some of the comparison going away.
yeah, yeah. And that piece of self-trust being like, well, they other people can do and say whatever they want, and I know that I can make choices that are right for me and are going to serve me in the moment. And I think part of it is just that presence too, like when you are lost in the like, what are they doing, what are they talking about, and what should I start to do because of it, and then you're like running off with some plan that you have to make for yourself and all these changes you have to make for yourself, whatever. You're certainly not just like sitting there in that space that you're in and enjoying the moment that you're having. And it's a lot harder to like enjoy people that you spend time with too when you're like on a freight train to like restriction town.
I love that. Yeah, totally. I think diet culture steals like our presence, our brain space in so many ways. And that's one, the comparison is like one example. And also the spiraling of like, should I do that? Should I do that? And then all of a sudden you're not at lunch with your friend. You're like you said, on a freight train to what'd you call it? Restriction town?
Yeah.
I love that. What, if you can remember, were some of your hesitations when thinking about like going on with intuitive eating, signing up for the embodied method?
I think, I mean, the normal fear of, I think, anyone that's entrenched in diet culture is if I let go of any degree of what I feel like is my control over the situation. Um, I mean, we live in a really fat phobic society, so just this fear of gaining weight, right? Like, I just was like, what if I just keep getting larger and larger and larger and larger? We live in a world that's like unkind about that, you know? And also, I mean, I grew up with that mentality, right? Of like there being judgment around larger bodies. And so I think my biggest fear was just that, like if I let go of the reins, um, and am not living in some like restrictive space, then I'm just gonna, go off the rails in the other
Yeah.
direction. A lot of weight gain and body changes, and also it's hard to see. I think it takes a while, I think, to start to feel that feeling of ease. Like it wasn't like all of a sudden you tell yourself one day, like, you have unconditional permission to eat, and you're like, okay, cool. Now this is chill. It was like there was a lot of times I feel like almost every week or every other week, you're like, don't forget you haven't been doing this for that long. It's normal to still have those thoughts. It's normal to still have, where I was like well, I ate this thing and I keep on, and you're like, yeah, of course. And that little reminder that like, yeah, of course, was like, oh yeah, my brain is totally just like a normal human brain doing normal human brain things. Of course I'm feeling and acting this way. That reassurance was also really helpful. But yeah, I think the biggest fear going into it was just this, that I would just like lose all semblance of control over my, behaviors, and that I would just really, I don't know, gain a significant amount of weight.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Such valid fears. And like you said, we live in a world that is stigmatizing about weight. So of course, like it's valid to worry about that. What would you say, like looking back on that hesitation or fear, um, what would you say now that it's like been a few months and there's the fear of being out of control, the time of just like, your body like betraying you and just continuing to expand in a way that's like totally, again, I think that comes down to out being out of control. When you look back on that hesitation now, what comes up for you?
Well, I mean, I definitely feel like obviously I didn't lose control of anything. Like there's a feeling of like things kind of normalizing, like my appetite is kind of chill. Like, I don't have these like ravenous like desires for really anything. And I also like when I do have a desire for something, I'm like, yeah, have some of that, enjoy it. And then I can like notice when I reach the point of like even play foods like not being as exciting anymore, which I was like, that didn't exist before. Like I was like, what do you mean it stops being good? No, it never does. Like
Mhm.
none of it doesn't. Like, what are you talking about? There's a satisfaction point now that didn't exist before. So like it's very like almost like a light bulb, like, oh, all of that fear was actually being caused by the restriction itself, right? Like you're not gonna be out of control around food unless you start taking them all away from
Right.
yourself.
And
Yeah,
the irony being is like when we fear like being out of control around food and diet culture, it's like you're already out of control around food. It's controlling your life. It's all you can think about. If you have it in the house, like it feels hard to just like have an amount that feels good and move on. And then when we give ourselves unconditional permission, which we think will lead us to be out of control, we have more control than ever because we're not feeling so like deprived and possessed.
totally. 100%. So yeah, it's that funny realization of like, I'm actually way more chill now than I ever was. And I mean, to be honest, like I did experience a little bit of weight gain throughout the course of this whole year, but like I'm not going to attribute it to this experience because I'm like, I'm not really eating. It's not like I started eating more than I ever had before or anything like that. I honestly think it's more related to the like period of extreme restriction at the beginning of the year and my like bounce back from that, my body being like, what the freaking heck were you doing? And I'm just like getting older and like, I don't know, that's like kind of normal with aging. It's like just
Yeah.
a bit bigger. So
Absolutely. And yeah, this idea that like correlation doesn't equal causation, where like think like, oh, like this thing happened and so it must be like because of my actions. And it's like there's other factors beyond eat food and exercise that can cause one's body to change, like aging or hormones or like genetics. Like there's so many other pieces going on. And the fact is like our body isn't our fault.
yeah.
Um the the pieces like to address, because I think that people listening, this is probably a big concern. So like the fear of weight gain, what do you feel like for you, like it starts out as a fear of weight gain, like almost what would you tell Lauren 5 6 months ago if that was her fear in going all in with this work?
I mean, one thing I would say is like, well, that's always been your fear. Like, okay. You know what I mean? Like, and I did CrossFit and I still ended up gaining some weight. And I did this and I did that and all of those things were this like heavy, sort of difficult, stressful, hard thing to do that was not designed to make me feel better about myself or better in my life or like have more space for like joy or any of those kinds of things. And I still ended up gaining weight throughout all of those years as well. Like it wasn't ever like, oh, well, that one time I had the magic solution and then, and but this is different. So there was part of me that I would be like, yeah, and what? Like you when haven't you been afraid of that? And like when did that ever, like was there ever something that really was like the like thing that affected that. There wasn't. Your body was just like doing what it was doing the whole time. And also like the feeling now of just not being so judgmental about my body size and recognizing that like that feeling has nothing to do with the size that my body is, right? Like I'm just really more aware of like being a whole entire person who has a body that helps me live my life, but like isn't like a sum of these various physical parts. Who cares? Even if I did gain weight, like who cares? Like the feeling on the other side of it is worth the experience, whether it came with some body changes at this time or not. And I also like really am like, I'm really loath to believe that they have anything to do with this. This is just like what my body's doing right now.
Mhm.
And it seems to like have chilled out. So I'm like, whatever, this is where we're at,
Yeah.
it's like, who knows? And that's the other thing, the freedom is to think like, your body's going to keep changing. You're getting older. You're like, things are going to keep happening to your body because it's like this very complex machine. And we're like being affected by the world around us all the time, too, right? Like, we're oxidizing and like,
Yes.
like all kinds of things. And it's so like, it's going to keep changing. And like, having created some space to be able to reflect on any kind of change, whether it's just like my hair starts getting really gray suddenly soon, like I'm getting to be that age, they're showing up. What if suddenly I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna have gray hair all the time? That's like a body change that some people might have a lot of judgment around, but like having space to be like, oh yeah, okay, that's a change that's happening, and just being like, okay, I'm still me as Lauren, and having gray hair or any other number of things doesn't like stop me being this person.
Totally.
So yeah, I would say like, I don't know, don't worry about
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
maybe,
That's what
maybe
you would say to
and
Lauren
like
6 months ago. Like, or I think it's like, it would probably be hard for Lauren 6 months ago to hear, don't worry about it. But like I almost think of like the wording of like, you think that this is your biggest worry right now, but like once you experience the peace and freedom on the other side, like you actually won't worry about it as much.
yeah. Yeah. And the reality is like, I mean, I also like I had the hardest time for the longest time letting go of weighing myself. I just don't, I'm like, yeah, so just don't do that. Like, I just don't have that behavior pattern anymore either. Like, and it was such a hard thing to let go of for the longest time. And then, yeah, like also being able to walk away and say, like, why do I need to even know that data
Mhm.
right now?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
is that something? Because it just feels like something to, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could get to the point too where I'm like, I am interested in that information and I know that I won't like bully myself with it, but it doesn't feel like that right now. So I'm just like, so I don't even need the information.
Totally. Yeah. I hear so much in kind of like your body image, like pre doing this work and post being being more what's the word? Like viewing yourself in your wholeness now versus like you said the sum of the parts, and being able to see like even if my hair goes gray or my body changes, like I'm still Lauren. Like I think that that is such a beautiful shift, like seeing your body as a vessel versus seeing your body as like you're offering to the world, like as something you have to perfect, like as this project that you're always like sculpting and working on, and instead just seeing it as like a vessel that allows you to like connect with others, share your gifts with the world, like live through your values. To me, that is one of the most like profound shifts, and you completely embody it. So I just want to like reflect that back.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does feel that way. I feel like that's one of the things too, is like living through values. I feel like, a lot of my values lean towards social justice. And if you're entrenched in diet culture, inherently that does not have a social justice bent anyway. But I'm also like, that blocks like that intuitive ability to like be present, sit with like uncomfortable things that are happening in the world, be aware of other people's experiences. Like you don't get to do any of that when you're in that like mindset of restriction and control and like, but yeah, like the belief also that your body is some offering to the world aesthetically.
This is such a good
Like
point. Like you don't
if
have the
you're
bandwidth to be concerned with social justice because you are hungry and you're preoccupied with food and body thoughts all the time.
And also stay perpetually mad at the patriarchy, and I'm like, well, then why would I be constantly trying to like chisel my body into this like male gaze approved like small? Why do women need to be small anyway? Oh, because what, they're like easier to control or something? Like, I don't know. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff too, that some of that is what led me, I think, down this path as well. It's just the realization of like the society that we live in and wanting to divest from that in many ways. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the values piece is really big because I think often when we experience like feeling physically uncomfortable in our bodies, part of it is actually like an energetic dissonance of like my value is one thing, yet I am acting in another way, and the body's like meh, 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 like this is like not. It's like when you try to put two magnets together that are like the opposite or the wrong sides, and you get that like force field. And then when doing this work, getting clear on your values, starting to live through your values, there's that like resonance that can just, even if your physical shape doesn't change, like the energy that you're like living with can feel drastically different just from living in alignment with your values.
Totally. That's 100% true.
I'm getting fired up now. I'm like, I'll tell you about values. What would you tell, for the last question, what would you share with someone who's like on the fence about doing this kind of work? What might you share with them?
Well, I think it's always valuable. I like time spent working on yourself and healing your relationship with yourself, healing your image of yourself is like always time well spent. And then I would also say this is work that is really, really, really helped by being in this kind of environment, like having the support to work with you through this work made, I feel like for me, all the difference. Because anytime I feel like, I don't know, I'm a person with a lot of like leaning towards like, therapy, self-help, all those kind, I mean, I read a lot of stuff, whatever. But like showing up and doing the actual work, for one, like the piece of like showing up and meeting with someone on a regular basis, like kind of kept me like working through things, but also when things get difficult and having the support and the like person to talk to about it and whatever made a huge difference in terms of continuing to move forward. Because I could very much see how many times throughout the process, like that little call of like, but maybe you can just do this one more thing. Maybe you can just diet like one more little time and then return to this. Like, no, that's not the point. But like that, I could see myself having been derailed a little bit if I was doing everything out completely on my own. And so, yeah, I think the value in doing the work on yourself in any capacity is so important. I mean, this is the relationship you have with yourself is going to be with you till the day you die, right? And so doing that work is so valuable and like really special in a certain way to be like trying to like be like I can trust myself, I can like love myself, that's really really a, a like really special thing to work on. But then having support through it, I think just made a huge difference. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I always often say like you can do this by yourself, or some people can. You might just be spinning your wheels, getting frustrated, feeling set back a lot because there's a lot of that like questioning, doubting, like, wait, like, is this okay? Like, oh, wait, should I just go back to dieting for a little? And then it can kind of make the process longer because you're like, a person said something that set you back and then you didn't like have a place to go and get validation or something about it. So yeah, I definitely think that the value of like getting those things dealt with in a timely manner can
yeah,
really help you like move through the hump of this work
yeah.
faster, which a lot of people want, because sometimes getting over that hump is the most painful part.
Totally. And I think just the validation in general was like such a huge piece of it. Like having someone who obviously has education experience, like in this field, like be like, of course you're reacting that way. Like that alone, like was so important, I think, to the work for me because if you're coming into this with the mindset of like, I've done everything wrong and I need help doing something different or whatever, you're not saying, of course you're doing it this way. Of course you're reacting that. That's like not your inner dialogue, right? Like that's not the tool in your tool belt at that point in time. It is now for me, but that came from like working with you. Um, because yeah, like the idea that like as you're questioning things, having someone who's like, well, did you know? Sometimes it was even just like the really sciencey stuff that really helped me be like, oh, maybe
Mhm.
freaking mine does too, you know, maybe like, but that piece of just feeling like, oh, I'm so connected to the experience that all these other people in the world have, and having someone to remind me of that, like, yeah, actually, you're really normal. Actually, your body and brain are doing what brains and bodies do because you're a human. Like,
Totally.
was a huge help.
Right. That like universal piece of like, you're not alone, you're not crazy, this is common. Yeah. Oh, Lauren, I feel like so by like just it's really like beautiful to just kind of sit back and hear you reflect. And I feel so grateful to have gotten to work with you and witness this whole journey.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful too. I feel like it's a very life-changing experience for me. So thank you.
Is there anything we missed or anything you wanted to add about your story or your experience in the embodied method?
Um, the only thing I guess I would say is like one of the hardest things, and the other piece that makes the support so vital is like your surroundings probably won't change. And so many people in the world are so entrenched in diet culture. And so much in the world is like deeply fat phobic, kind of like I was joking about watching episodes of New Girl earlier. I was like, dude, this show
It's
is
yeah,
really bad about fat. Like it's like every episode too. I'm like, my God, all they do is like say terrible things or like have a guy in a fat suit. It's bad.
hmm
Um, but like that, the world is not going to change around you. So sometimes it can feel really like tricky and tough to change. But the support is really like beautiful and wonderful and makes it possible. And then it's just like worth it, you know? Because
hmm
once you're kind of through that, the your lens changes to where you're like, being affected by that. I just think this is absurd and kind of gross. Or you hear someone saying something and you're like, oh, like I'm sorry that they still feel that way. Like that's pretty rough for them to be carrying around, but like I'm not taking that on.
Totally. Yeah, the support with like I think of it like armor, like with like
Yeah,
handling diet culture comments like in the world. It's just like you need to have the tools to be able to know what to do in those moments and to know how to not let it cause you to spiral.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you for your time, Lauren. It's so beautiful hearing you reflect, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. I know it will resonate with many people.
Happy to, and thank you. It's
Of
been
course.
a real gift for me.
Aw.
So